Welcome back. We're so excited to have you here. Our next panel will be titled Staying Secure While Maintaining Privacy. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this panel. And let's start out with some introductions so that you can get to know us. And then we can get into some really good dialogue. I'd first like to introduce who likes to be called Rags, and he can tell his story and what he's about and where he's from.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity. And right up front, I've got to state this, that the views you're about to hear are my own. They're not the official policy or position of the Department of Defense or the US government. All right, and actually I love to be able to have that disclaimer because in part it allows them to speak more freely. And just in short, I currently am in a role, I'm the principal director for cyber in the Department of Defense and the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And we're focused on those leap ahead capabilities that technology will afford us in the out years. And before I came to this, back to the Department of Defense about almost 2 years ago now, I had left the department having served 39 years in a variety of roles and capacities. And I was a long-haired college professor at Texas A&M forever.
Long-haired.
Well, so to speak, you know, with air quotes. I was encouraged to come back during a critical time, and so thrilled to be working with a great team of folks that are getting after many of the issues, some of which we're going to discuss today. So I look forward to the opportunity. Thank you,
Rags. And next we have VG. VG, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm VG. My name is Vaibhav Garg, but I tend to go by VG to make it easier for people to take my name. So I am the Senior Director for Cybersecurity, Public Policy, and Research at Comcast Cable. So I've never been a long-haired professor, but I am also an academic by training. So I have a PhD in security from Indiana University and master's in security from Purdue. And that has been kind of framed how I've been approaching security, which is looking at it from a research lens. And that's kind of what we do here at my team, which is basically looking at the gaps that exist currently in the market to try and build some new technologies to address cybersecurity needs that companies might have, in particular Comcast, of course. Our primary customer are our internal teams.
Thank you. And my name is Lisa Barksdale, and I'm the in-business privacy lead at Citi, covering our global consumer bank. And my primary really mission is to incorporate privacy by design as a first line of defense, and make sure that we're compliant with all of our regulations and understand our processes, and work extremely close in the whole information ecosystem. So working close with our cybersecurity, our information security, and all the other components that involve the whole data environment. So I'm looking forward to this conversation with the gentleman. Okay. So I think we have a question. So our first question, and Daniel or VG, whoever wants to take it first, companies are using every tool at their disposal. And that's probably because, there's a lot of tools out there, but there's a lot of regulations and stuff that are coming with that. And with those regulations, there's operational impact to the businesses. So what role can software, and more specifically AI, play in that effort? So Rags or VG, whomever wants to take that first.
Do you want to go, Rags?
Oh, I will defer here. I'm actually anxious to hear what you have to say, and I of course have some things I'd like to contribute also.
Right. So, definitely AI has been quite useful in supporting privacy needs. The way we've been thinking about it is privacy is sort of a building block that builds on top of security. And a lot of the times providing some security guarantees in the system can be difficult because it requires a lot of manual effort. So the place where AI has been super useful is in automation and in scaling things that were previously done manually. So not to kind of toot my own horn, but one of the things that we've been working on is this issue where it's a commonly known issue where developers in a company might post either passwords or API keys or other different kinds of secrets on GitHub, which is a commonly used repository. And oftentimes, like, people are trying to push their code out to GitHub, and along with their code, they'll push out some company secrets. Now, these secrets, it's, no one can actually manually go one by one and actually, investigate each and individual GitHub repository, right? So oftentimes companies will depend on the kindness of third-party researchers to find these things and report them to the company. But the challenge there is that if an attacker sees these secrets before a third-party researcher does, they now kind of have a way to grab foothold into the company, and from there on they can engage in either privilege escalation or lateral movement. So we've been building basically a machine learning AI powered tool internally to scan these repositories at scale. So we have a researcher on our team, Dr. Bauman Rashidi, who gave a talk at Black Hat last year on the tool and how it works. But one of the benefits is that, it tells us in almost real time. I say almost real time. So within a matter of an hour to 2 hours, if someone posts a Comcast related secret on one of these repositories, we get an alert within 1 to 2 hours. So we can right away action it and do a takedown. So that kind of automation and scalability can be really, really helpful in finding some of these, obscure things, for lack of a better phrase.
Can I ask a question, just to piggyback on that a little bit? So is that tool to help, let's say, with incidents or data breaches? Is that something that's leveraged?
Right. So that's, so the idea is that, using that tool, we can prevent an incident or a data breach from happening, because if we can detect these secrets ahead of time, we can then go close those. So like if we find a repository that has Comcast secrets on it, we can contact the repo owner for a takedown. So that's kind of the idea there. And there are some tools that exist on the market right now. So there's something called Trufflehawk. And then there are other things that do similar stuff. But one of the challenges with some of these AI tools is that they give you a lot of hits. So when we tried using Trufflehawk, and we got so many hits, and a majority of them were false positives. So you can't really action them. So, it worked out for us because we ended up building something that gave us, a high level of confidence so we could actually action those.
Okay. Thank you. Rags, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I sure do. And if I could, I want to harken back to the decades-old problem. My early work in this area, in the security realm, was in looking at ways to do more effective, more efficient, more reliable intrusion detection. And at the time, there was a great deal of tension between anomaly detection versus the signature-based approaches. And signature-based approaches won out. Well, we've seen that. We have. And the reason being is the problem that was just alluded to is the vast array of false positives that can occur when you do anomaly detection. Now, having said that, so there's some issues that have to be addressed, or anomaly detection schemes will never be wholly embraced, right? But we believe that there's an opportunity here to do two forms of behavioral analysis that can help address this problem. So behavioral analysis in terms of how systems and systems operate and how systems interact with other systems. And then there's behavioral analysis just in terms of what human subjects do in the context of the performance of their duties. And both of those behaviors when someone paints outside a line, or a system paints outside a line, that in some anomalous fashion, that gives us an opportunity to look for and ferret out the potential for a breach of privacy, a breach of security. So we're certainly, we believe there is some opportunity here, notwithstanding that there's some really significant challenges to be addressed. And when I talk about anomaly detection, of course, machine learning algorithms that are available to us now can increasingly and more. We've got more computational resources being brought to bear, and that is a real opportunity. But it's not just your classic, supervised learning, where there's unsupervised learning, where you've got a collection of events that appear to be related, and a label then could be put against that, and it could be something along the lines of something malicious and/or something would violate our rights to privacy. So certainly believe there's an opportunity here to leverage some of that, but there's still obviously, as been pointed out, some work to be done.
Yeah. No, I agree. And in my space, since it's more focused on like the data privacy, we're always reactionary to the incidents. And if we can get to a point where we can detect prior to, or at least have some awareness that, these are happening and coming up with solutions so that we're not reacting to it, I'm sure it would benefit all financial institutions. So good discussion.
And there's just one other point I'd like to reemphasize what was said earlier, and that is privacy has to rest on the most secure foundation that you could provide. And I say most secure, I didn't say secured or trusted, because that's a pipe dream. We got to be careful. We should all understand there is not and will never be a complex trusted system. There will always, and we need to acknowledge this up front, and that there will always be some potential vulnerabilities, some potential for a determined adversary to subvert whatever security measures.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
So we need the most secure foundation, because without that, all bets are off.
Mm-hmm.
If you could have policies and practices and even
yeah, but those are not controls.
Yeah. But you could have a good setup. Let's just call it that.
Mm-hmm.
But if your underlying ecosystem, your IT infrastructure is significantly vulnerable, then all bets are off.
Yeah, good. All right, I think we have another question. Keep this going. How does cybersecurity intersect with privacy within the technology system? Does AI affect that dynamic? And I'll say for us, we really focus more with information security. So the way I look at it as, data privacy, right? So privacy is the information flowing through the pipe, and I feel the pipe around it, around the information is the security, right? So that can be the information security or cybersecurity. So we work extremely close with those groups because we have to, right? We all are focused around the data. As of late, some of the regulatory impacts like your Gdpr and Ccpa have brought us really close together. And that's really because of the evolving definition of data, right? And redefining what that actually is, and making sure that what we're saying is information, sensitive information versus what cybersecurity and what information security is saying as data. So going through that whole classification exercise was very eye-opening over the recent months and years because of the regulations, which has made us actually better, right? It's allowed us to better understand the type of data we have, how we're using it, who's using it, and making sure that we are securing it. So for us, it allows us to continue to evolve. We're looking to get ahead because from a regulatory perspective, that will continue to, there will be a continuation of regulations that are coming down the pike. Most of them are following the GDPR model. But again, you have, from a global perspective, New Zealand, Brazil, who are coming up with their own type of regulation. So, we've taken, as long as we're focusing around the data, we're understanding it together, and we're coming up with the same methodology and approach. It's really been a great intersection of the two disciplines. Does anyone else want to stab at that?
I will defer here.
Rags, you want to go first? VG went first last time. Yeah.
You're hitting the nail on the head. At the end of the day, GDPR and CCA have definitely caused all of us to take a much harder look, and also world events and the constant number of breaches. There is, there is much greater awareness throughout large enterprises, medium-sized, small, into homes across the global community, of the importance of some of the things you're talking about. So there will be an increasing demand signal in certainly in the private sector and the public sector, and from consumers for the kinds of things you're talking about. And I actually give great credit to the European Union and California for laying out some of this. The Department of Defense has recently released a DoD data strategy, and it has a lot of the same elements that we're referring to, some guiding principles. Data is a strategic asset. So does that sound somewhat like the private sector talking there? And there's a vast array of data ethics. We can never forget who we are as a people, and the civil liberties that we are beholden to support and defend on the behalf of the United States and U.S. citizens. And there's another element that you don't always see, at least articulated in some of the documents you referred to, and there's a governance piece of this. So data, once it leaves your hands, so to speak, and what controls are in place to determine that it even as it leaves your enterprise in some form, that you are still beholden to the same requirements, the same constraints. You're still honoring those principles as codified in GDPR and the CCPA. So that governance piece, frankly, there's a vast array of open research questions here. So again, you're talking to a technologist, somebody that is working very closely with researchers across the Department of Defense, S&T, enterprise, but out into the private sector, and there is much work to be done if we're going to have true data governance. I mean, it's not a new issue, but it has become more pressing with each passing breach, or with each passing disclosure, with each passing revelation, and the importance of protecting your intellectual property for your company is paramount. The importance of protecting and it's related very much, if you think about it, it's not two sides of the same coin, right? Protecting your IP is not a whole lot different than protecting PII or PHI. Thank you. It's not fundamentally different. And how does one go about doing that? And how does one bring practices to place to do so? So
I think you brought up a great point about the data governance, and I think sometimes that piece is forgotten. There is direct correlation between data privacy, cybersecurity, information security, and data governance, right? I think one of the important aspects is understanding from an operational perspective how your businesses process data, and understanding that, right? Because the consumers, right, they're becoming a lot more educated. right? Thanks to GDPR and CCPA, and they have a lot more rights, right? And they want to know from a transparency perspective what you have on them, and we need to be able to produce that information. So as the professionals, we need to make sure that we're understanding what our businesses are doing with that data, that they're using it properly, and that it's readily available so that we can make sure that we're complying with the regulations. And definitely data governance comes into play. VG, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question, right? So I think the dynamic with AI is quite interesting, because on the one hand, the whole notion with AI is what I want to do is make things more predictive by, adding more and more data. But at the same time, in some ways, what we need to figure out is like, how can we, make same kind of predictions, or maybe even better predictions with less data. So Rags had mentioned this, the notion of anomaly detection. So we've been kind of thinking about it, and this is slightly interesting phrase, which is, we have the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns, right? So
now you're talking. Now you're
yes.
talking my language. That's awesome. Go ahead, please.
So when we talk about like signature-based anomaly detection, right? That's kind of your known knowns. And then you have kind of like the traffic-based anomaly detection, which is sort of your known unknowns. We know what is normal, and now we're trying to figure out, what is this deviation from the known normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so your signature-based anomaly detection, right? That's very good from a privacy perspective, because you're just looking for a particular kind of pattern. When you're looking at traffic-based anomaly detection, now you're processing large volumes of traffic, so that is maybe not as friendly to privacy. So we've been thinking about, so one of the things that we've been working on internally, and again, kind of going on the tooling side of things, for retail stores, we've been looking at the DNS queries that are coming out of our retail store devices. And in this case, so one of the, I apologize, just a slight digression. One of the ways that we used to prevent malware from coming into the perimeter is that we used to create a list of IPs and URLs that we were like, okay, these are known bad domains, and we shouldn't allow anyone to access them. But the way malware works now is that these domains are produced by DGAs, or these are digitally generated digital generation algorithms that produce these domains, and they're very short-lived. So like using an allow list or do not allow list of domains is not particularly useful. It has some use, but it doesn't catch everything. So what you really want is you want to be able to catch these domains on the fly, which may exist, maybe for a matter of hours, maybe for a day. Certainly, very few of them exist for more than a week. So we've been analyzing each DNS query and saying, okay, well, does this DNS query look like the kind of DNS query that you can reasonably expect, right? Well, we know what general, domains look like, right? Domains are supposed to be human readable, so they look like Comcast.com or NewYorkTimes.com or NBCU.com. Now, if you see a domain that is like XYZ1234QRXT, it's like ridiculously long and has lots of consonants and has lots of numbers, well, that looks a little bit odd. So you can find these unknown unknowns using a lot less data, because now you're not looking at the entire traffic. You're actually only looking at the structure of the DNS query, and you can identify a lot more attacks that way. And you're able to find information about devices that may be infected that can be used for data exfiltration much, much faster. So I think.
So can I ask you a question, right? Because you're talking about specific data elements to fuel your profiling, right? And the way that the regulations are evolving, specifically CCPA, it specifically talks about what's considered PII is profiling data. So when you are trying to comply with those regulations, how are you breaking that data apart to say, are you just saying we have profiling data and it could be examples of ABC, or are you providing more detail around what makes up that profiling data?
Right. So I don't really work on the compliance side of things. So we have a
Okay.
privacy team that we are joined to the hip with. And so,
Okay.
and we have, internal and external facing privacy policies around DNS queries that we strongly adhere to. And these are not customer facing. These are this is just for retail stores. So this is just within our enterprise. So we are not talking about analyzing our customers' DNS queries. But what I'm trying to get to is that, we are now trying to build these AI approaches that don't have to process large volumes of data to get the same kind of intelligence, but they are maybe some new kind of ways of thinking about AI, where you're actually analyzing a lot less data, but at the same time, you're making better predictions. More importantly, more actionable predictions. I think that that's one of the biggest challenges, not to kind of, beat a dead horse, but if you look at some of the reports that have come out of a lot of breaches that have happened over the last year, what we find is that, well, there was some alert that was going off somewhere that people were aware that this was a problem. But if you go and work at a SOC, these people are getting like gazillion alerts all the time, right? So you have a hard time figuring out, okay, this is a this time when someone's crying wolf, this is an actual wolf and not a sheep that is just like has overgrown hair, right? So this is where some of the models that we are trying to build, our approach has been, we what we want is something that is high fidelity. We want to be able to detect something that is 0 day, right? Which is something that you cannot do with signature-based anomaly detection, which is something that is hard to do with traffic-based anomaly detection. And then at the same time, you also want to detect low volume attacks, which are the kind of attacks that usually get missed by the current IDS kind of systems, because again, they're looking at large volumes of traffic. So in your tuning, when you're tuning that control, either you tune it to be too sensitive, at which point you're getting lots and lots of hits and you don't know which one is the right one, or you tune it where you're getting few hits, but then there's the possibility that you miss a lot of low volume attacks. So I think in some ways, and this question will, in some ways, if we sort of think about improving AI for functionality, it has some indirect effects on privacy, in the sense that you actually are collecting less data, and you automatically, a better technology is often turns out to be more private as well. Sorry, I'll stop with my monologue now.
No, that was good. That was good. Rags, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, just on that point, I think that there is no question that the problem of excessive false positives bedevils security operations centers and many others that are using approaches that could pan out to be not a true positive. And of course, if you tune them such that they're not as chatty, then you have the prospect of the true misses, which is the false negatives. And so that has been with classifiers as a problem historically. Some of the recent approaches that have been brought to bear with using a variety of machine learning approaches perform better with respect to those two metrics. So I would certainly highlight that gives us some cause for hope. But also another principle that, frankly, I work in an area in Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering that focuses on modernization technologies that have the potential for high impact. for future capabilities. And, you know, it's all the usual suspects that you would imagine. Cyber's in there, directed energies in there, hypersonics is in there, biotechnology is in there, autonomy is in there, AI, and the list goes on, quantum. But what one of the principles that many of us are bringing to bear to try to address that problem is this notion of diversity. And you didn't hear me say redundancy, because redundancy does not always speak to some degree of independence. But if you have diverse means to do the same classification that are sufficiently independent, then you have the means through which to poll those two. And it is our assertion that through a combination of some degree of independent, diverse means of coming to the same conclusion is going to help address some of those false positive and false negative issues. So this remains to be seen. There's a variety of efforts that are focusing on that, but I would propose that as one way to address the perennial, longstanding challenge of false positive and false negatives when you're trying to ferret out behaviors that are inconsistent with your organization's goals.
Very good. Very good. Great dialogue, guys.
Thank you.
I think we have another question. Oh, I love these acronyms. How are regulatory developments like Gdpr and Ccpa impacting operations? I have a lot to say about this, so Rags, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so I am standing and cheering. I'll just say this: I believe that I have been working in the area of cybersecurity and cyber operations for decades now. But I believe that the most important contribution we can make is to develop capabilities that are privacy enhancing. And so those organizations that shine a bright light on this, notwithstanding, I know there's an economic impact of this. So I'm not discounting that. This is the public sector guy saying private sector, do spend a lot more money. But I really believe we all have a moral obligation to do what we can to enhance the privacy of the systems upon which we are increasingly dependent. It's not as if we could just simply unplug. So I'll just say that without any of the specific details. As a private citizen, as one that has been devoted his life's work to helping provide more resilient and more secure systems, that the most important benefit of that is to have privacy enhancement for our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think, with GDPR, it brought, things to the surface that, most consumers just weren't aware of, right? How we utilize the data, which then makes them look at the products that they hold in their wallets, right? And in their homes, and how they interact with those day-to-day things and how it impacts, their data and what's being used. So it's really forced privacy professionals to work very closely with their businesses and understand the products that are being used and how consumer data is driving those products. How do we use those, the consumer data in a responsible way and securing it, but at the same time utilizing it to drive revenue for the businesses, right? And to make privacy and the protection of that privacy easy for the consumer, right? They want their products, right? And they're willing to give the data, but they want to feel comfortable giving that data and ensuring that that data is being protected, right? They want those products. So it's up to the businesses to ensure that they're protecting it. And GDPR started that, right? Starting peeling back and saying, all right, you really need to understand how you're using that data. And then when we got to California, and there were other regulations that made us look at that, right? And we know California is really the driver and the leader in the US privacy regulatory space. But then CCPA came along and said, listen, we are, we're saying that a California resident can call a company that does business in California and say, listen, what do you have on me? And that business needs to respond. And companies were like, wow, okay, how are we supposed to do that? So operationally, yes, there was an impact, right? And California was just the beginning. There are other states that are going to be doing that. So in order to be compliant, I believe there's most, companies, and I worked with, I work for Citi, but I'm a part of different forums with other FI financial institutions, and we collaborate and talk about, what we're doing and how we're working through these regulations. And, most of them were really ready to scale it, right? They want to make sure that they're not just satisfying for the now, but they're satisfying for the future. And they're coming up with better ways to understand their customers, making sure that they're using the data to enhance services, right? And come up with products that customers may not necessarily think that they want, but when it's provided that they have. So while I think some of the businesses are kicking and screaming, ultimately I think it's great that these regulations are coming out. My only concern sometimes really is the technology evolves much faster than the regulatory landscape can keep up, right? And they're constantly playing catch up. So I like to see that gap close. And there's more of a collaboration between, the policies and the regulations and the technology giants. So, anything else? Okay.
Just one final point.
Sure.
Just again, easy for somebody that's not, that does not have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value. Mm-hmm. Right, that would be me, and folks like me. It's very easy to impose regulations, but if you look at them, they're actually quite reasonable, right? If you just hold them up at face value, it's like, yeah, it's hard to deny that that's a reasonable thing, but it does put a demand signal on large, medium, and small enterprises to, well, how can we comply? And right. that demand signal, I think, is healthy. It causes us to do. It's always the right time to do the right thing, right? And the right thing is, it's just hard on the surface, point by point. You can't argue with accountability and accuracy and limitations on where the data on me is shared, and that I shouldn't be discriminated against if I want you to be more restricted. It's hard to argue. So let's find ways, technical means through which, without imposing too great a cost that would put our businesses at disadvantage, at a competitive disadvantage, but at the same time protecting people's very legitimate rights to their own data.
And that's the difference between like the EU and the US, right? The EU, it's a right? It's a right, they have a long history around privacy. With the US is more of a contractual obligation that they have to do. But I think the US is starting to, really soften up to it being more of a right and doing the right thing. And companies are starting to embrace it. So.
And just one more point on that, this in the guise of conversation. It's a little bit of it's a different perspective. In the United States, let's be honest, and for good reason, we are very concerned about governmental violations of our privacy, but less with respect to the private sector. So think of, any number of companies that you could think of that does pretty significant collection of information, and the whole billions of dollars industry for data broking on where they have better models for me, better models for you. They are more predictive than us, right? They can predict our actions presented with given stimuli better than we can.
Of course.
That's a little scary, but
isn't that how the Apple got created? Telling us what we didn't even know we wanted.
Yeah, but if you go to the European Union, they're less worried about their governments and they're more worried about the private sector. I mean, there's kind of both communities are worried about the government and the private sector collecting data. But in the States, we're more concerned about the federal government or local or any governmental instrumentality And in Europe, they're more concerned about the private sector. I find that to be an interesting.
Well, yeah, but originally in the EU, it was the government. The government really kicked that off. So once they got that under control, then it's shifted more to the private sector. But their foundational privacy is based on how the government utilized unfairly their data. So
Sure. So absolutely. But I will say that the most surveilled states outside of Asia happen to be the European Union with respect to, you go in a public square, you are surveilled, and they're very comfortable with that in ways that maybe in this country, we may not be as comfortable.
Yeah, good. This was really good. All right, I think we have another question. Does building for privacy bring with it opportunities? And opportunities can be relative. However you think, opportunities are being created out of privacy, please, let's share that. So VG, you've been a little quiet. You want to start?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of ties back to something that was, mentioning before, which is, as we built some of our anomaly detection systems, right, we realized that, we can produce systems that are more actionable in some ways by using less data rather than more. So I think sometimes having constraints on what you can do can be more beneficial. Kind of an ancillary example would be like if you try to write a poem, right, and no one gives you any structure and you have to write a free form poem, that's a lot harder to write if someone says, well, you have this meter that you have to write to. And those kinds of constraints, they kind of, in some ways, make you rethink what the problem is. And so you don't fall into the trap of, we used to collect, the way to build a model is to collect tons and tons of data and then, try and overfit it so that you get, 99% accuracy. And that looks really, really good in a demo. And then because you've used so much data to train that model, when you actually deploy it in a context that is probably not the same context in which you trained it, you actually don't get very high performance, which is a problem that you run into. Oftentimes, you'll see these, really fancy products on the market. They have, a gazillion dollars in funding, and then you actually start using them in an enterprise setting, and then you realize that they're actually not giving you very good performances because a lot of these models are really, really overfitted. So, if you have less data, you're not overfitting the models, you get better performance results. I mean, and certainly like, a couple of tools that I talked about, both of those tools have come out. We built them primarily because we had this question of, okay, well, if we don't, in the absence of these tools, we have this gap that can potentially lead to a security or privacy incident. So how do we actually go about addressing these gaps? So I do think that if we don't think of privacy as a roadblock, if you think of it as just another, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So if you can definitely do more with less. I think there is, in the past 10 years or so, there has been a lot of focus on how do we scale AI, and that scaling issue has been always about the performance of models over bigger and bigger data sets. And I think now, in an operational setting, at least in cybersecurity, there's the focus is more on how can we produce results that are going to be actionable, and that by definition means things that are going to be high confidence, even if they are low volume. And actually low volume is preferable. And that kind of means that, privacy has been, when we build things that have been better performing, the privacy aspect has already been incorporated into it from the beginning.
Very
Hopefully
good.
that made
That was
sense.
good. No, that was good. Rags, you want to
Yeah,
add something?
so is there, can privacy be, are there opportunities? And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, we've been, without beating the dead horse, you cannot have any confidence of keeping PII and PHI and IP private if you don't have some confidence that your systems, by virtue of the way that they're architected, configured, and otherwise, have some degree of security, some form of resilience. Because without that, it's a necessary but not sufficient. It's necessary but not sufficient to have privacy. So I see great opportunity. Every data breach you can think of. As a matter of fact, I was just doing that. It all comes back more often than not to some security vulnerability that presented. So, in those breaches, becomes a breach typically of privacy or intellectual property. So, it's about those breaches. So, what can we do to design, build, architect systems that are more resilient in the presence of determined adversaries? And so, really, all roads lead back to that, and then of course accounting for the specific requirements. These are now become crown jewel requirements, right? This is because of the regulatory and statutory requirements that everyone must be beholden to. But just to simply work on the privacy aspect of it, like, for example, the other day I inadvertently was trying to send my wife a document with my social security number in it, which I felt comfortable doing, but forgot to realize I had encrypted it. And at the gateway, it said, "Oh no," and it caught me. Which, that's good, but that, you don't want that to be your defense. You would rather have, it's probably a bad analogy because I can't figure out how you would do this otherwise. But you get the point. We need to have more resilient, more trustworthy systems throughout the software supply chain. Where a la SolarWinds comes immediately to mind. And more as a fundamental building block to get systems that are privacy enhancing.
Yeah, opportunity happens all the time for me in privacy, and because of the regulatory landscape, it forces us to look at our systems and really do diagnostic around, do we really need all this data, right? Like VG, like you were saying, like doing more with less, right? Looking at that and looking at our data lakes, and do we need all this data? Are we using it? Are we looking at our record retention policies correctly? Are we actioning that? And are we really utilizing it to its fullest potential? So from an opportunity perspective, looking at the systems, making sure that the systems, are talking, stop working in silos, and making sure that you have comprehensive centralized systems that you can utilize the data as efficiently, effectively across your businesses. And then understanding your data, right? One of the things that was created out of GDPR was a tool called ROPA, which is a record of processing activity. And it really allows us to understand who's using the data, why, frequency in which the data is being used, the record retention schedule around the data, all that, just giving us more eyesight into it and understanding it, and being more responsible consumers of that data, and making sure that our customers and consumers are comfortable with what we're doing. So there's always opportunity. I think anytime a new regulation comes on board, there will be additional opportunities. So just being open to that, and making sure that we're doing the right thing by the consumers with the data, I think is the path that you always want to go down.
Yeah, if I could give a shout out to what a former dear friend and colleague, Richard Danzig, was 4 or 5 years ago. He wrote a surviving on a diet of poison fruit, I'll get it. Reducing the national security risk of the American cyber dependencies. And what he was talking about there is exactly what you're talking about. We need to make those hard choices. Just because we can interconnect system A with B, and just because we can mix data set A with C with data set C, just because we can, we need to bring the voice of the adversary into that discussion. Like, how might that, certainly we know why we would do it for our own advantage, but maybe we can accept a circumstance where we don't do that because it will could unwittingly expose ourselves to non-compliance and or disclosure of private information. So I would hardly recommend that, even though it's a few years old, to dust that off to see, maybe we can accept a little, frankly, inconvenience or lack of reduced functionality to account for this other very pressing requirement.
Very
So
good.
I would, frame it slightly differently. So I think in some ways, privacy actually increases your choice set. So you have to make hard choices. I mean, you think that you have to make a hard choice because you're looking at a set of choices, let's say A, B, and C, and you never knew that there was a choice D that was available to you. An example I'll give is, again, kind of going back to the technical tooling. So NIST recently, maybe it's not that recent, time has lost all meaning. They published a special publication on lightweight cryptography. Now, originally, this effort was for resource-constrained devices. But now that lightweight cryptography is out, what we're realizing that it actually provides some of the same kind of security guarantees that we get from run-of-the-mill cryptography. So now you can actually use lightweight cryptography even on devices that are not necessarily performance constrained. So now you're giving people, additional resources on the same device that they've been using for years, just because now they can use lightweight cryptography. So it forces you to change your thinking, and sometimes there's a lot of additional benefits that you get from that.
Yeah. So I couldn't agree more, and you're hitting the nail on the head. And actually, one of the sort of the bumper stickers for the organization I'm in is we're helping illuminating the realms of the possible. And so there are certainly those circumstances where you don't have to be less convenient. You don't have to set aside functionality. You can actually do more. And so amen. I think it's a combination of those two approaches.
Yeah. I agree, and I know we got to close up, but I think privacy should be more of it's really it could be a product, right?
Yep.
And a lot of companies are evolving it into just more of a tool for consumers to utilize, and it's really like a suite of tools and saying, you know what, these are all your privacy choices, making it friendly, making it people want to do it, understand it, digest it, and making it part of their brand. So I think there's a lot more to come around privacy and cybersecurity, and I think it's just a topic that we can probably continue to talk about for hours. So I know we're at our time, so thank you.
Oh, I do want to thank Lisa for moderating the panel. I know that was additional work that she pulled, so I really appreciate you doing that, Lisa.
Absolutely, it was fun. You guys made it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't thank you enough. It's been a real pleasure. Look forward to continuing to interact over time.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to Lisa, and thank you to both of our panelists. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I know our audience is giving you a big virtual round of applause. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right. If you're looking for your next session, you can go ahead and check out your agenda to see where you're going next, or take some time to connect with your peers with some virtual networking. Maybe you can discuss what we've talked about here at this panel. All right, thank you, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.